Hello my friends, it is time. We are finally making the cardigan. I am not fully sure why I'm shouting. I want to start this off with a disclaimer. I have never done a full film tutorial for a garment before, but I tried my best. I had fun and I hope you're gonna like it. And if you don't, please, in the kindest way possible, tell me what I can do better next time. If everything goes according to plan, I have divided this video up into parts to make this smoother for you, and the timestamps will be in the description. I hope you will end up with a good looking cardigan just like me. What sets this apart from other Granny Square cardigans is that the squares are turned 45 degrees, which means that you're gonna need to fill the gaps with large triangles and small triangles. Do not be afraid, it looks harder than it is, and this is gonna be a smooth ride. Let's get into it.
This garment is incredibly oversized and the measurements don't correspond to any sizes known to man, so I have made up my own sizes. They are called left, middle, and right in the order that you read them, and for reference I am wearing a size middle. All sizes are made with the same amount of squares and triangles. The only thing that differs is how many rows you're going to work in those squares and triangles. In order for you to find your perfect size, I have made this handy little chart. Now keep in mind that all of these measurements are taken flat, and to get the circumference of the body and the sleeve, you are going to have to double them. The yellow arrow that measures from one tip to the other on one of the squares also doubles as your gauge. So when using the right size hook and the right yarn, you should get the yellow measurement. I want to reiterate that this cardigan is incredibly oversized, and if you feel unsure on what size to choose, please choose the smaller one. First off, I have no idea what happened to the colors on this picture. To be perfectly honest, I have no idea what happens to colors at any given point in this video. I just noticed it for the first time. But yeah, I apologize in advance for any upcoming color issues. However, let's get into the squares. To make this cardigan, you are going to need to make 22 full squares. In addition to these 22 full squares, you will also make 16 triangles, and these triangles will be exactly half the size of your full-size squares. You will also make 8 triangles that are slightly smaller to fill the smallest gaps. These will correspond to about a quarter of the size of a square. Again, all sizes will make the same amount of squares and triangles. The only thing that differs is the amount of rows. I would suggest that you screenshot this so that you can reference it later on in your project. Since I have to plug what I have in store, I will start off the yarn section by showing you my options, which is Maya and Bris, both by Viking Yarns, then Alice and Bella, both by Permin. My cardigan is made in 6 different colors of Bella, but you can choose to go solid or use even more colors. Now, I completely understand if you want to look for yarns that are outside of these 4 options, but please keep in mind that what you're going to need is a lightweight worsted. Not a light worsted, a lightweight worsted. What this means is that you want yarn that per 50-gram ball has approximately 150 meters of yarn. Now, this sounds very, very long, but this is because it's lightweight. It is usually fluffy. It usually has a recommended hook and needle size of approximately 7 millimeters, and the recommended gauge should fall around 17 stitches in stockinette stitch on the recommended needles. The reason you need this yarn to be incredibly lightweight is that this cardigan absolutely eats yarn. Even for this lightweight yarn, you're still gonna need between 550 and 700 grams of it. So just make sure that you're not using a yarn that is too heavy, as it's gonna make the project lose shape. You're gonna work on a 4.5 millimeter hook, or the hook size needed to meet the gauge shown by the yellow arrow. For those of you who are new or need a refresher, I'm going to show you how to make a granny square and granny triangles. You're going to start with a magic circle from which you are going to chain 3. After you have chained 3, you are going to work 2 double crochets into the magic circle. These 2 double crochets together with the first 3 chains will form your first granny cluster. After you have finished this first cluster, you chain 3 and then proceed to work an additional 3 double crochets into the magic circle. You are going to repeat this process until you have a total of 4 clusters on this first row. Each cluster will also be separated by 3 chains. These 3 chains form the corners. When you reach the end of the row, simply slip stitch join the final 3 chains to the first stitch of the row. If you're working with more than one color, you're going to want to fasten off here. If you're working in a solid color, just continue crocheting. To join in a new color, simply pick it up from one of the corners and chain 3. In the same corner, proceed to double crochet 2 and then chain 1 over the next cluster. In the next corner, double crochet 3 to form a new cluster and then chain 3 to form a new corner. Now, in the same corner from your first row, double crochet 3. You are going to repeat these steps until you get to the end of the row. So to recap, in the start of a corner, double crochet 3, chain 3 to form a new corner, and in the same space as the first 3 double crochets, double crochet an additional 3. Over the next cluster, chain 1, and repeat the process of double crocheting 3, chaining 3, and then double crocheting 3. You end the second row the same way you ended the first row, by slip stitch joining your final 3 chains to the first stitch of row. Again, this is just a refresher on how to make a granny square. For a more thorough tutorial, I have linked my favorite ones in the description. Starting at row 3, you are going to repeat the instructions from row 2, but also work additional clusters under the chain spaces from row 2. So the instructions for row 3 and onward will be double crochet 3 in the corner, chain 3 to form a new corner, double crochet 3 in the same corner, chain 1 over the next cluster, then double crochet 3 under the chain space, and then chain 1 over the next cluster. These are the instructions you are going to repeat for the remainder of this project. If you need a reminder for how many rows you need, it's coming right here. Keep in mind that the magic circle does not count as row 1, but the first row of clusters is row 1, and you're going to start counting from there. There are also more than one way to make a granny square. This is just how I do it, and if you have a preferred way of doing it, simply go for that. Moving on to the granny triangles. You are going to start these off the same way you did with the squares, by making a magic circle. Now instead, you're going to chain 4, and this will make up your first mock double crochet and the first chain space. Then you're going to proceed to double crochet 3 to form the first cluster, and then chain 3 to form the first corner. Then into the magic circle, you are going to double crochet an additional 3 to form the second cluster. Then you are going to chain 1 and double crochet 1. End the row by fastening off just like you did with the squares. And you're going to end up with something that looks like this. For the second row, identify the third chain of your first mock double crochet, insert hook and pull yarn through here. Now chain 4, that will make up your first mock double crochet and your first chain space. Now under the fourth chain, you are gonna double crochet 3 to shape the first cluster. Then you are gonna chain 1 over the next cluster and then double crochet 3. Chain 3 to make the corner and double crochet 3 in the same space. Again, chain 1 over the next cluster, and in between the second cluster and the final double crochet of the first row, make 3 double crochets to make the final cluster. Then chain 1 and make a double crochet into the final stitch of the first row. For the next however many rows are needed to make your size, you are going to repeat the instructions from row 2 while also adding in the double crochet cluster under the chain space, just like we did for the squares. This is what I meant when I said that this looks way harder than it is. And just in case you need a reminder for the row count for your size, it's coming right up. So as you can see, you need 16 large triangles of either 7, 8, or 9 rows, and 8 small triangles of either 5, 6, or 7 rows. Now we get to the part where you're just gonna have to trust me. Start by weaving in your ends and then blocking your squares using an appropriate blocking method for your yarn. Now the placement of the square and the triangles isn't going to make a lot of sense until the end of the joining process, but I have made this very handy chart. As you can see, the large triangles are represented by pink, the small triangles are represented by green, and the squares are both purple and blue. There's no difference between the purple and blue squares, I just didn't want a whole solid block of color because that wasn't going to be helpful at all. Use whatever joining method you prefer. I use the zigzag slip stitch, which I of course forgot to film. But yeah, just use your preferred joining method to join all the squares and triangles in all the places that they touch. When you have done so, you are going to place the cardigan with the right side facing down on the floor in this way. So you have the opening pointing away from you and the solid part pointing towards you. As I tried to illustrate with the arrows here, you are going to fold the whole thing over and it's going to look something like this. Then just fold the triangles and squares over to sort of close the whole cardigan, both at the bottom sides and at the sleeves. And now it's starting to make a little more sense. Use your preferred joining method to join at all the new places where the triangles and squares touch each other, except for the bottom hem and at the end of the sleeves. When you're done, it's going to look like this. To prepare for the finishing edges, you are going to work one setup row of granny clusters. You are going to start at the bottom left corner, and by that I mean left when you're wearing it, right when you're looking down at it. Treat this corner as you would the corner of a granny square and start by chaining 3 and double crocheting 2 in the same space. The bottom hem and the front opening is worked continuously as shown by this slide. You will also do the same thing for both of the sleeves, but for these just start at any point, really, it doesn't matter. The setup row is worked very similarly to the rows of granny square, in which you will work clusters of 3 double crochets under each chain space. However, you will not be making any new chain spaces. So when you have made 3 double crochets in one chain space, you are going to move on to the next chain space and double crochet 3 without adding a chain in between. However, when you get to a corner, you are going to chain 1 in between the 2 clusters that are made in the same space. I have no idea what to call this part, but when you get to it, just skip, don't make an extra cluster. When you reach your starting point, just slip stitch join with the first stitch of row. Just to repeat, do it on the bottom hem, the front opening, and on both sleeves. We are now going to make the fake knit ribbing, and you are going to start in the new corner in the same place where you started your setup row. We are going to start with the bottom hem, so just insert your hook, pick up yarn, and chain 2. These 2 chains counts as the first stitch of row. Proceed to work along the bottom hem by slip stitching 1 through both loops of each of the double crochets from the granny cluster setup row. Be mindful not to pull the slip stitches too tight, as you don't want the hems to cinch. And if you need it, just feel free to go up a hook size for this first row. When you reach the end of the row, you are going to make your final slip stitch in the new corner that is made up of 1 chain from the setup row. If you changed your hook size, now is a good time to change back to your original hook size, and then you simply turn and chain 1. For row 2, you are now going to yarn over slip stitch in the back loop only to the end of the row. So yarn over, insert hook in the back loop, pick up yarn and pull through all loops on the hook. You just continue to do this until you reach the end of the row. When you reach the end of the row, make sure that your final yarn over slip stitch is made under the 2 chains that make up the first stitch of row 1. Then simply turn and chain 1, and now for row 3, you are going to work half double crochets in the back loop only. So for row 3, no yarn over slip stitches, instead you are going to work half double crochets. Continue to do this until you reach the end of the row. You are now going to repeat row 2 and row 3 until you have a total of 6 rows on your edge. Just to clarify, on the even rows, you are going to make yarn over slip stitch through the back loop only, and on odd rows, you are going to make half double crochets through the back loop only. The 6 rows in total includes the setup row of slip stitches. When you are done with the bottom hem, move on and do the same things to both of the sleeve edges. When you have finished the sleeve edges, you are going to need to sew this up on the short side as to not have a split. And this is what it looks like when it's done. To get started on the front opening edge, you are going to want to start at the bottom hem on the right side when worn. So not the left side this time, the right side when worn. Insert hook and pick up yarn in the bottom stitch of the bottom row of the bottom hem. Chain 1 and then proceed to slip stitch 1 in each row of the edge. When you reach the granny clusters, you are gonna, just like you did for the other edges, slip stitch 1 through both loops of each double crochet. Do this until you reach the other side of the bottom hem and then slip stitch 1 in each row of this. Turn and chain 1 and work row 2 through 6 just like you did the other edges. And then you just have to weave in your ends. Since you already blocked the squares, there is no real need to block them, but do that if you feel like it. And this is your final cardigan.
And we're back here where we started. I hope this was helpful. I hope you made a beautiful cardigan. Please let me know if you have any questions. And until next time. Bye, my friends.